Organic claim. Sir, I need to see some identification and ask you a few questions about your bicycle registration. Oh, fuck! That piece of junk shouldn't be here! Know your place, kid. No one's going to believe you. You don't belong in this neighborhood. I'm impounding this bicycle.
That piece of junk shouldn't even be on this street. The words sliced through the warm afternoon air like a blade. Officer Derek Mitchell stood beside his patrol car, arms crossed over his chest, his mirror sunglasses reflecting the trembling figure of a 16-year-old boy straddling a slightly worn mountain bike. The bike's frame showed its age, scratches along the metallic blue paint handlebar tape coming loose at one end, a small dent near the seat post. But the chain was oiled, the tires properly inflated, the brakes recently adjusted with care. Marcus Williams felt every eye on the street turn toward him. The traffic light ahead cycled from green to yellow to red, but nobody moved. Pedestrians on the sidewalk slowed their pace. A woman in a business suit stopped mid-conversation on her phone. The outdoor diners at Romano's Cafe 2 storefronts down craned their necks to see what was happening. In the span of 3 seconds, a quiet residential corner in the heart of Riverside Hills had transformed into an impromptu theater, and Marcus had become the unwilling star of a show he never auditioned for. The officer took 2 steps closer, his leather belt creaking with the weight of his equipment. His hand rested casually near his radio, a gesture that seemed practiced, almost theatrical. "I said, what are you doing in this neighborhood, kid?" Marcus's throat felt tight. He'd been riding these streets since he was 12, knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house with the friendliest dogs, every shortcut through the park. This wasn't some foreign territory he'd stumbled into. This was 3 blocks from home. "I live here, sir," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, remembering everything his mother had taught him about these moments. Hands visible, voice respectful, no sudden movements, just heading back from the community center. Officer Mitchell's jaw tightened. Behind him, his partner, Officer Amy Chen, stepped out of the patrol car, her expression unreadable but her posture alert. A small crowd was beginning to form, not rushing toward the scene, but not leaving either. Phone cameras emerged from pockets like fireflies at dusk, their red recording lights blinking in the afternoon sun. "You live here?" Mitchell's voice carried across the street, loud enough for everyone to hear. "In Riverside Hills, on what street?" The challenge in his tone wasn't subtle. It hung in the air like smoke, acrid and unmistakable. "Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more." Marcus Williams had learned about dignity before he learned algebra. His mother, Patricia Williams, had taught him that respect wasn't something you begged for. It was something you carried inside yourself, regardless of whether others chose to recognize it. She taught him this during their morning runs through Riverside Park, during their Sunday meal preparations, during the quiet moments when she'd look at him with those fierce, protective eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Patricia worked long hours as a senior policy advisor, a position that required her to leave the house before sunrise and often return after dark. But she always made time, always asked about his day, always listened when he talked about his dreams of becoming an architect, of designing buildings that brought communities together instead of walls that kept them apart. Marcus's father had died when he was 7. Cancer, swift and merciless. He remembered fragments, strong hands lifting him onto shoulders, deep laughter that rumbled like thunder, the smell of cedar wood and coffee that seemed to cling to his dad's flannel shirts. After that, it had been just him and his mother, building a life that was smaller in numbers but no less full of love. His best friend, Tyler Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, though they shared a last name, lived 4 houses down. They'd met in 3rd grade when Tyler's family moved to Riverside Hills from California. Tyler's parents owned a small tech startup that had recently been acquired by a larger firm, and they'd chosen this neighborhood specifically for its diversity and strong schools. Tyler and Marcus were inseparable. Same classes, same lunch table, same dreams of changing the world through design and innovation. Then there was Coach Raymond Ellis, a 63-year-old former college basketball player who ran the community center's youth programs. Coach Ellis had taken Marcus under his wing 2 years ago, recognizing something in the quiet teenager that others might have missed. A burning desire to prove himself, not to others, but to the version of himself he knew he could become. Under Coach Ellis's guidance, Marcus had transformed from a skinny freshman into a lean, athletic young man with a jump shot that was beginning to turn heads at regional tournaments. Sarah Martinez, the neighbor who lived in the corner house with the enormous magnolia tree, had taught Marcus Spanish while he helped her with yard work. She was a retired teacher, a widow who spent her afternoons tending to her garden and her evenings reading poetry in 3 languages. She'd lost her husband 5 years ago, and in Marcus she'd found a surrogate grandson, someone to fuss over and feed homemade tamales and challenge with increasingly complex linguistic exercises. This was Marcus's world, these tree-lined streets with their mixture of craftsman homes and modern renovations. The Saturday farmers market where Mrs. Kim sold the best Korean tacos in the city. The small bookstore on the corner that stayed open late on weeknights. The pocket park where neighborhood kids played pickup basketball until the streetlights came on. He'd earned his bike through a summer of work, mowing lawns and helping Coach Ellis with maintenance projects at the community center. It wasn't a top-of-the-line model, but it was his. Every scratch had a story. The dent near the seat post came from the time he'd swerved to avoid a loose dog and collided with a mailbox. The worn handlebar tape was from countless rides to school, to Tyler's house, to the community center and back. The bike represented freedom, independence, the ability to move through his world on his own terms. Until today, when those terms were suddenly being questioned by a man with a badge and a tone that suggested Marcus's very presence in this neighborhood was suspicious. Officer Mitchell circled the bike slowly, his eyes scanning every detail as if searching for evidence of a crime. His partner, Officer Chen, stood a few feet away, her hand now resting on her radio, her gaze moving between Marcus and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Riverside Hills," Mitchell repeated, drawing out the words. "That's a pretty expensive neighborhood for a kid on a beat-up bike like this. Where'd you get it? Someone give it to you." The implication was clear, and it landed like a punch to Marcus's stomach. His hands tightened around the handlebars, knuckles pressing white against his brown skin. "I bought it," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt inside. "I worked all summer, saved up." "Worked where?" "Community center, lawn care, odd jobs." Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something in his posture hardened. "Community center, that's convenient. What's in the backpack?" Marcus wore a simple black backpack, the kind sold at Target for $20. Inside, his basketball shoes, a water bottle, the book he was reading for English class, his wallet with his ID, and the $43 he'd been saving for new brake pads. "School stuff, basketball gear." "I'm going to need to see inside that bag." This was the moment when everything shifted. The crowd on the sidewalk grew larger. More phones appeared. A man in a business suit stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Officer, I'm Robert Chen, Tyler's father. I know this young man. He lives down the street from us. Is there a problem?" Mitchell turned toward the interruption, his jaw clenched. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. This is police business." "Police business?" Robert Chen's voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard. "What crime are you investigating?" "Suspicious activity, possible theft." The words hung in the air like an accusation without evidence, a verdict without trial. Marcus felt his face grow hot, felt the weight of every stare, felt the familiar burn of injustice that his mother had warned him about but that no warning could truly prepare him for. Because there was no suspicious activity. There was only a black teenager on a bike, riding through his own neighborhood, existing in a space where someone with power had decided he didn't belong. Sarah Martinez emerged from her house, drawn by the commotion. Her face went pale when she saw Marcus surrounded by officers. She started walking toward the scene, her age-weathered hands already reaching into her cardigan pocket for her phone. Officer Chen, the female officer, not Robert, finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than her partner's but carried an edge of warning. "Derek, maybe we should." "Maybe we should do our job," Mitchell interrupted. "Kid, I'm not going to ask again. Open the backpack." Marcus looked at the faces around him. Tyler's father, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. Sarah Martinez, clutching her phone. Other neighbors he recognized, people who'd waved to him from their porches, who'd complimented his mother's garden, who'd hired him to rake leaves or shovel snow. Their faces reflected something he'd never seen directed at him before. Pity mixed with outrage, helplessness mixed with fury. He slowly removed his backpack, unzipped it with deliberate movements, and held it open. Mitchell reached inside without invitation, pulling out items one by one. The basketball shoes worn but clean, the water bottle, the book, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, the wallet. Mitchell opened the wallet, counted the cash, examined the ID, Marcus Williams. Age 16. Address, 847 Maple Grove Avenue, Riverside Hills. The officer's face barely registered the information. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the address that proved Marcus's statement. Instead, he held up the $43. "That's a lot of cash for a kid to be carrying around. Where'd you really get this money?" The question detonated like a grenade in the middle of the street. Several onlookers gasped audibly. A woman in yoga pants muttered, "Oh my God." Tyler's father took another step forward, his phone now out and recording, his face flushed with anger. "That's my allowance and my birthday money," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. "From my grandmother." "Your grandmother?" Mitchell's tone dripped with skepticism. "What's her name?" "Dorothy Williams." "And where does she live?" "Atlanta." Convenient, long distance, hard to verify. The casual cruelty of the moment was staggering. Here was a teenager, stopped on his own street, being interrogated about money that was rightfully his, forced to justify his grandmother's existence to a stranger with a badge who had decided, based on nothing but the color of his skin and the condition of his bicycle, that he must be guilty of something. Officer Chen, the female one, touched her partner's arm. "Derek, his ID checks out. He lives on Maple Grove. We should probably make sure he didn't steal that bike," Mitchell said, cutting her off again. "Kid, do you have a receipt for this bicycle? Registration." Marcus felt the world tilting. It was a cash purchase, private sale, 2 years ago." "Private sale, so no record, no proof of ownership." Mitchell's voice grew louder, performing now for the audience that had gathered. "For all we know, you could have stolen this bike from someone's garage, could have taken that money from someone's purse, could be on your way to meet up with friends to cause trouble." The accusations piled up like snowdrifts, each one more absurd than the last, each one burying Marcus deeper under the weight of assumptions that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with prejudice. Robert Chen's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Officer Mitchell, I am recording this interaction. You have verified this young man's identity and address. You have found nothing illegal in his possession. On what grounds are you continuing this detention?" Mitchell spun toward him, finger pointing. "Sir, I will not warn you again. Interfering with a police investigation is a criminal offense." "What investigation? You've admitted you have no complaint, no reported theft, no probable cause. You stopped a kid on a bike because you didn't think he belonged in his own neighborhood." The truth of it echoed across the street, undeniable and damning. Other voices joined in, a chorus of neighbors who knew Marcus, who'd watched him grow up, who recognized this moment for what it was. "I've known Marcus for 4 years," Sarah Martinez called out, her Spanish accent thick with emotion. "He is a good boy, a respectful boy. He helps me with my garden every Saturday." "That's Patricia Williams's son," another voice added. "She's lived here longer than half of us." But Mitchell's face had hardened into something beyond reason. He'd committed to a course of action, and the public questioning of his authority only seemed to entrench him further. "I'm impounding this bicycle pending verification of ownership," he announced. "And I'm issuing a citation for failure to provide proof of ownership of property." The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Marcus felt his chest tighten, felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, felt the desperate desire to call his mother even though he knew she was in a meeting, unreachable, unable to protect him from this moment that was spiraling beyond his control. Officer Amy Chen stepped between her partner and Marcus, her voice low but firm. "Derek, we need to talk, now." She pulled him aside several feet away, and an intense whispered conversation ensued. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see the body language. Chen gesturing toward the crowd, toward Marcus, her expression urgent. Mitchell shaking his head, his posture defensive. Tyler's father moved closer to Marcus, his presence a shield. "Don't say anything else," he whispered. "Don't answer any more questions. I've already called my attorney." "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus whispered back, his voice breaking on the last word. "I know everyone here knows. That's why we're all recording." But knowing didn't feel like protection. Recording didn't feel like justice. Marcus stood there, his bike now held by Officer Mitchell, his backpack re-zipped but somehow violated, his dignity shredded in front of his neighbors, his safety suddenly uncertain on streets he'd walked and ridden 1,000 times. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A car alarm went off, then silenced. Life continued in its mundane rhythms while Marcus's world had been turned inside out by a man who'd looked at him and seen only suspicion, only threat, only something that needed to be controlled and contained. Mitchell returned from his conversation with Chen, his expression even more rigid than before. He pulled out his citation book, began writing with aggressive strokes of his pen. "I'm also citing you for loitering with intent," he said without looking up. "Loitering?" Robert Chen's voice was incredulous. "He's 3 blocks from his house. He was riding home." He was stopped in a high-value neighborhood with no clear purpose. His clear purpose was going home. The circular logic was dizzying, Kafkaesque. Marcus had committed no crime except the crime of existing, of being young and black in a neighborhood where someone with power had decided that combination was inherently suspicious. The citation was torn from the book with a sharp, ripping sound and thrust toward Marcus. His hand trembled as he took it, the paper feeling like a brand, like proof of guilt for transgressions he'd never committed. Mitchell attached a tag to the bike frame. "You can retrieve your property at the station after ownership is verified. Bring your mother and proof of purchase." "I told you it was a private sale." "Then bring the person you bought it from. Bring witnesses. Bring something more than a story." Mitchell loaded the bike into the back of the patrol car with unnecessary force, the frame clanging against metal. "Until then, consider this evidence in an ongoing investigation." The words "ongoing investigation" felt like a noose tightening. Investigation of what? Of riding while black, of existing in your own neighborhood with a bike that showed its age, of carrying your own money and wearing your own clothes and living your own life. Officer Chen approached Marcus, her face troubled. She handed him a card. "This has the case number and the station address. I'm sorry about—" She glanced at her partner, seemed to reconsider her words. "Bring your mother, we'll get this sorted out." But there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew it wouldn't be that simple. That Mitchell had created a situation that would require lawyers and paperwork and hours of stress for a family that had done nothing wrong. That the sorting out would cost time and money and emotional energy that could never be fully recovered. As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus's bike visible through the rear window, a strange silence fell over the street. Then slowly the neighbors began to approach. Sarah Martinez hugged him, her small frame trembling with anger. Tyler's father put a hand on his shoulder, promised to make calls to find help. Others offered words of support, of outrage, of disbelief. But Marcus barely heard them. He was staring down the street where the patrol car had disappeared, his bike imprisoned in the back, his citation crumpled in his fist, his entire sense of safety and belonging shattered like glass. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, "Meeting running late, be home by 6, love you." He stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell your mother that you'd been stopped, searched, accused, and had your property seized while riding home from basketball practice? How do you put into words the feeling of being treated like a criminal in your own neighborhood by someone sworn to protect and serve? His fingers hovered over the screen, then fell away. This conversation needed to happen face to face. This was the kind of news that couldn't be delivered through text message. Tyler's father drove him home, the 3-block journey feeling both too long and too short. When they pulled up to the modest but well-maintained 2-story house at 847 Maple Grove, Marcus saw Mrs. Henderson from next door standing in her yard, phone pressed to her ear, her eyes following him with concern. Word had already spread. The neighborhood grapevine, once a source of community gossip and event planning, had become a network of witnesses and allies, of people who'd seen what happened and were already making calls, sending messages, demanding answers. Marcus thanked Tyler's father and walked up the path to his front door, his legs feeling heavy, his backpack seeming to weigh more than it had an hour ago. The key turned in the lock with its familiar click. The house smelled like the lavender potpourri his mother kept in bowls throughout the rooms, mixed with the lingering scent of this morning's coffee. Everything looked the same. The photos on the wall, his father's smiling face, Marcus's school pictures through the years, his mother receiving an award at some ceremony. The small bookshelf crammed with volumes on architecture, poetry, political theory. The worn but comfortable couch where they watched movies on Friday nights. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The safety of this house, of this neighborhood, of this life they'd built, it all felt suddenly fragile, like a stage set that could be struck at any moment by someone who decided you didn't belong. Marcus sank onto the couch and finally let the tears come, hot and angry and frightened all at once. He cried for the humiliation of being searched in public, for the loss of his bike, his prized possession, his symbol of independence, for the way Officer Mitchell had looked at him, not as a person, not as a neighbor, not as a kid who'd done nothing wrong, but as a problem to be solved, a threat to be neutralized. He cried until his throat hurt and his eyes burned. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Tyler, "Made it home. Thanks for everything your dad did." Tyler's response came immediately. "Dad's already called his lawyer, said no way this stands. We got you, bro." Another text appeared, this one from Coach Ellis. "Heard what happened. Come by the center tomorrow, we need to talk." Then Sarah Martinez, "Made you empanadas, we'll bring them over later. You are loved, Mijo." The messages kept coming, a flood of support and outrage and love from the community that knew him, that saw him for who he really was. But underneath the gratitude for their support ran a darker current, the knowledge that all these witnesses, all this documentation, all this community backing might not be enough. Because the system wasn't designed to believe kids like him. The system was designed to give the benefit of the doubt to the badge, not to the teenager trying to explain that this was his neighborhood, his street, his life. Marcus looked at the citation crumpled in his hand, loitering with intent. The words were bureaucratic, clinical, but they represented something much more sinister, the power to criminalize existence itself, to transform the mundane act of riding a bike into evidence of ill intent. He smoothed out the paper, reading the details. Court date 3 weeks away. Potential fine of up to $500. Mandatory appearance. His stomach churned at the thought of standing before a judge, of having to defend himself against charges that should never have been filed. The front door opened at 6:15. Patricia Williams stepped inside, her professional attire slightly rumpled from a long day, her briefcase heavy in her hand. She took one look at her son's face and dropped everything. "Marcus, baby, what happened?" And in the familiar safety of his mother's arms, Marcus finally found the words to explain how his ordinary afternoon had become an ordeal, how his bike ride home had become a citation, how his neighborhood had become a battleground where his right to exist peacefully was suddenly open to question. Patricia listened without interrupting, her face cycling through emotions, shock, rage, fear, determination. When he finished, she held him at arm's length, looking directly into his eyes. "This is not okay," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her eyes. "None of this is okay, but baby, I need you to hear me. You did everything right. You were respectful. You knew your rights. You kept your composure. I am so proud of you, even though you should never have been put in that position." She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Marcus watched as she made call after call, to her lawyer, to the police chief's office, to someone she called Director Morrison, to several other names he didn't recognize. Each conversation grew more intense, her professional voice giving way to the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose child had been wronged. "I don't care if he's off duty now," she said into the phone, her tone brooking no argument. "I need to speak with Chief Reynolds tonight. Yes, tonight. My son was illegally detained and had his property seized without cause. I'm Patricia Williams, and the chief will want to take this call." There was a long pause. Marcus could hear a tinny voice on the other end, placating, trying to establish procedure. "Fine," his mother said, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "Tell Chief Reynolds that Patricia Williams called about an incident involving Officer Derek Mitchell. Tell him I'll be in his office at 8 a.m. tomorrow with my attorney and a full report of this civil rights violation. And tell him that if this isn't resolved immediately, my next call will be to every media outlet in the state." She hung up and made another call immediately. "Michael, it's Patricia. I need your help. Marcus was stopped by RPD this afternoon." As his mother continued her calls, organizing a response with the efficiency of someone used to navigating complex systems, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The helplessness began to recede, replaced by a different feeling. The certainty that his mother was not someone who would accept this quietly, who would let this injustice stand without a fight. But beneath that certainty ran a troubling question. If his mother needed to make this many calls, needed to invoke this many names, needed to threaten media exposure just to get a meeting with the police chief, what happened to kids whose mothers didn't have those connections? What happened to the teenagers who couldn't marshal an army of lawyers and community leaders and witnesses? What happened to the ones who faced Officer Mitchell alone? The thought haunted him as the evening deepened, as neighbors continued to stop by with food and support, as his mother's phone rang constantly with return calls from people promising to help, to investigate, to ensure justice was served. Because Marcus knew, even at 16, that justice wasn't something that happened automatically. It was something that had to be fought for, demanded, insisted upon by people with enough voice and resources and connections to make the system pay attention. And even then, even with all these advantages, he wasn't sure they would win. The citation sat on the coffee table, a paper monument to the afternoon's injustice. Marcus stared at it as the evening news played in the background, as his mother continued to make calls and take notes and build a case, as the sun set over riverside hills and darkness crept across the same streets where hours ago he'd been publicly accused and humiliated. Tomorrow, his mother promised, they would go to the police station. They would demand his bike back. They would file complaints. They would start the process of clearing his name from charges that should never have existed. But tonight, Marcus sat in his living room and learned a lesson no 16-year-old should have to learn. That your home is only your home until someone with power decides otherwise. That your neighborhood is only your neighborhood until someone with authority questions your right to be there. That your innocence is only innocent until proven guilty in the court of someone else's prejudice. The lesson burned worse than any physical wound, carved itself deeper than any scar. And somewhere in the city, Officer Derek Mitchell went home to his dinner, his family, his evening routine, probably never giving Marcus Williams another thought. But what happened next changed everything. The viral video hit the internet at 9:47 p.m. that same night. Tyler's father had posted the full footage to his social media accounts, all 12 minutes of it, from the moment Officer Mitchell first confronted Marcus to the patrol car driving away with the bike. The caption was simple. "This is what happens when a black teenager rides his bike home in his own neighborhood. This is Marcus Williams. This is Riverside Hills. This is wrong." By midnight, the video had been viewed over 200,000 times. By 2 a.m., it had crossed 1 million. News stations began calling. The hashtag #JusticeForMarcus started trending locally, then statewide. The phone in the Williams household barely stopped ringing. Patricia had finally turned off the ringer around 11 p.m., but the voicemail filled quickly. Reporters requesting interviews, civil rights organizations offering support, lawyers volunteering their services. Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, scrolling through his phone, watching the video of his own humiliation multiply and spread across the digital landscape. Each share, each comment, each outraged reaction was simultaneously validating and violating. Yes, people saw the injustice, but that meant thousands of strangers were now watching the worst moment of his life, dissecting it, commenting on his responses, his posture, his voice. Some comments made him feel seen. This officer should be fired immediately. That young man handled himself with incredible composure. This is everyone's son, brother, friend. This is unacceptable. Other comments cut deep. If he'd just been more respectful, this wouldn't have happened. There must be more to the story. Why are we defending someone who can't even produce a receipt for his bike? Even support felt complicated. Marcus didn't want to be a symbol or a hashtag or a cautionary tale. He just wanted his bike back. He wanted to ride to the community center without fear. He wanted to exist in his own neighborhood without having to prove that right to anyone. Around 3 a.m., his mother knocked softly and entered. She'd changed from her work clothes into pajamas, but clearly hadn't slept either. "Can't stop thinking?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Everyone's seen it now," Marcus said quietly. "Everyone knows." "Good," Patricia said fiercely. "Let them know. Let them see exactly what you went through. Let them see the face of injustice so they can't pretend it doesn't exist." "But Mom, what if nothing changes? What if he just gets a warning or paid leave or nothing?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Marcus had never heard before. "Baby, I haven't told you everything about my work, about my position, about the connections I've spent 20 years building." She took his hand. "I didn't want your life to be about my job, about politics, about any of that world. I wanted you to grow up normal, happy, free. But tonight showed me that there's no such thing as free when you're a black child in America. Not really. Not yet." "What are you saying?" She smiled, but it was a smile edged with steel. "I'm saying that Officer Mitchell made a mistake today, not just morally, strategically. Because the teenager he decided to humiliate happens to be the son of someone who knows exactly how to dismantle the system that protected him." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, his mother squeezed his hand and stood. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we go to war, but we go legally, properly, and with every advantage we've earned." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Marcus stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning. He'd always known his mother was important, successful, connected. But there was something in her tone tonight that suggested depths he'd never fully understood. Sleep came eventually, restless and dream-filled. He kept seeing Officer Mitchell's face, hearing that accusatory tone, feeling the weight of public humiliation. But mixed into the dreams were flashes of something else. His mother's fierce expression, the growing crowd of supporters, the sense that something larger than himself was beginning to move. When he woke at 7 a.m., the smell of breakfast filled the house. His mother was in the kitchen, dressed in what Marcus privately called her power suit, a perfectly tailored navy ensemble that made her look like she could negotiate treaties or dismantle corporations before lunch. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun. Diamond studs glinted in her ears, a gift from his father, worn only on days when she meant business. "Eat," she commanded, gesturing to scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. "We have a long day ahead." "Are we going to the police station?" "Eventually. First, we're making a few stops." The doorbell rang. Patricia checked her watch, exactly 7:30 a.m., and smiled. Right on time. She opened the door to reveal a tall, black woman in her 50s, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Marcus's bike. "Patricia," the woman said warmly, embracing Marcus's mother. "I came as soon as I could." "Marcus, this is Denise Franklin. She's one of the best civil rights attorneys in the country. Denise, my son Marcus." Denise shook Marcus's hand with a grip that conveyed both strength and compassion. "I've watched the video. What happened to you was wrong, and we're going to make it right. But first, I need to ask you some questions." For the next hour, Marcus recounted every detail of yesterday's incident while Denise took meticulous notes. She asked about his tone, Officer Mitchell's specific words, Officer Chen's reactions, the bystanders, the moment the bike was seized. She made him replay the interaction in his mind from multiple angles, extracting details he hadn't consciously registered. "This is good," Denise said finally. "Very good. The video corroborates everything you've told me, and we have multiple witnesses. But more importantly, Officer Mitchell violated at least 6 departmental policies and potentially several of your civil rights." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Denise exchanged a glance with Patricia. "Now your mother and I go have some conversations. You'll come with us, but mostly you'll wait, watch, and learn. This is going to be a masterclass in how power really works." Their first stop was City Hall, an imposing granite building in the heart of downtown. Patricia led them through corridors Marcus had never seen, past offices with names he vaguely recognized from local news. People nodded to his mother, greeted her by name, their expressions shifting when they noticed the attorney by her side and the serious set of Patricia's jaw. They entered an office with a nameplate reading, City Manager, John Morrison. A white man in his early 60s looked up from his desk, his welcoming smile faltering as he took in the group's demeanor. "Patricia," he said carefully, "this is unexpected. What can I—" "We need to talk about the Riverside Police Department," Patricia said, closing the door behind them. "Specifically, we need to talk about Officer Derek Mitchell and what happened to my son yesterday afternoon." Morrison's face went pale. I heard there was an incident. I was planning to look into it this morning." "Were you?" Patricia's tone was pleasant but sharp as a scalpel. "Because what I'm wondering, John, is how many other incidents there have been that you've been planning to look into. How many other black children have been stopped, searched, and humiliated in their own neighborhoods by officers under your supervision." "Patricia, you know I can't discuss ongoing." "This isn't a discussion, John. This is a notification." She gestured to Denise, who placed a thick folder on the desk. "Ms. Franklin will be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Mitchell, the Riverside Police Department, and the city itself unless several things happen immediately." Morrison opened the folder, his face growing progressively more ashen as he scanned the contents. "First," Patricia continued, "the citation issued to my son will be dismissed immediately. Second, his bicycle will be returned today with an official apology. Third, Officer Mitchell will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Fourth, the department will release a public statement acknowledging the wrongful detention. And fifth, you will implement mandatory bias training for every officer in the department, starting next week." "Patricia, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You've done it before when it suited your political needs. Remember the Johnson case? The Martinez settlement. You can move quickly when you want to, John. The question is whether you want to do it voluntarily or whether you want Ms. Franklin to expose every similar incident in Riverside PD's history through discovery." The threat hung in the air. Marcus watched Morrison's face cycle through calculations, political, legal, personal. He glanced at Marcus, seemed to see him fully for the first time, then looked back at Patricia with resignation. "I'll need to speak with the chief and the city attorney." "You have until noon," Denise said calmly. "After that, we file. And trust me, Mr. Morrison, you don't want this going public through court filings. The media attention will be extensive." They left Morrison's office and drove directly to the local offices of the ACLU. Here, Patricia was greeted like a returning general, with embraces and urgent consultations. Marcus realized his mother wasn't just connected to these organizations. She was one of their key strategists, someone they called when they needed to navigate the intersection of policy, politics, and civil rights. "We're already drafting a statement," a young lawyer told Patricia. "The video has given us leverage on 3 other pending cases involving RPD. If we move now while public attention is focused—" "Coordinate with Denise," Patricia instructed. "But keep Marcus's case front and center. He's not a political football. He's a 16-year-old boy who deserves to ride his bike in peace." Their third stop was the most surprising, the governor's mansion. Marcus had driven past this building countless times, never imagining he'd walk through its doors. Security was tight, metal detectors, ID checks, escorts. But Patricia moved through it all with the ease of familiarity, greeting guards by name, chatting casually with staff. They were led to a private office on the second floor. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair stood to greet them. "Patricia, I'm so sorry about what happened," she said, embracing Marcus's mother. Then she turned to Marcus, her expression pained. "And you must be Marcus. I'm Linda Chen, the governor's chief of staff. I saw the video. What was done to you was unconscionable." "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus managed, still processing where he was. Linda gestured for them to sit. "The governor is furious. He's been on calls since 6 a.m. with the police chief, with city officials, with the state attorney general. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on the entire state, and it cannot stand." "I need more than his fury," Patricia said bluntly. "I need action. My son was terrorized by someone who's supposed to protect him." "You'll have it. The governor is calling for an independent investigation, separate from the city's internal review. He's also fast-tracking legislation on police accountability that's been stalled in committee. This incident has given us the political capital we needed to push it through." As Linda outlined the governor's response, Marcus felt increasingly surreal. This was the state's power structure mobilizing on his behalf. But why? Why did his mother have this kind of access? Why did the governor's chief of staff know her by name, embrace her like a close friend? The answer came later, as they drove to their final destination of the morning. "Mom," Marcus asked carefully, "who are you really? I mean, I know you're a policy advisor, but this is something else." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the road. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with something between pride and regret. "I'm the senior policy advisor to the governor of this state, baby. I've held that position for 8 years. Before that, I was the deputy director of the State Civil Rights Commission. Before that, I spent 5 years with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Marcus's mind reeled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to have a childhood, a normal life. I didn't want you growing up thinking you were special because of my job or different because of the access I have. I wanted you to learn how to stand on your own, to develop your own identity separate from mine. But yesterday, someone made the mistake of targeting my son, of treating you like a criminal when you're one of the most decent, hardworking, compassionate young men I know. And that person forgot that every action has consequences, especially when you abuse the power you've been given." They pulled up to the police station, a modern building that suddenly felt less intimidating than it had in Marcus's imagination. As they walked toward the entrance, a news van pulled into the parking lot. Then another. Word had spread. The media had arrived. Chief Thomas Reynolds met them in the lobby, his expression carefully neutral. He was a tall white man in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and a bearing that suggested military service. Behind him stood Officer Amy Chen, looking uncomfortable, and a woman Marcus didn't recognize in civilian clothes. "Ms. Williams," Chief Reynolds said formally, "I understand we need to have a conversation." "We do," Patricia said. "But first, you're going to return my son's bicycle and issue a formal apology. Then we'll talk about Officer Mitchell's future with your department." "Ma'am, with all due respect, there are procedures." "Chief Reynolds," a voice called from the parking lot entrance. A man in an expensive suit strode in, flanked by 2 assistants. "I'm Attorney General David Martinez. I'm here at the governor's request to ensure this situation is handled appropriately." The Attorney General, the state's top law enforcement official, had shown up personally. Reynolds's face went through several shades of red before settling on resignation. "Of course, sir, if you'll all come to my office." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of legal terminology, departmental policy discussions, and barely concealed threats. Denise Franklin laid out the case against Officer Mitchell with surgical precision. The Attorney General made it clear that the state's eyes were on Riverside PD. Officer Chen provided her account, which differed dramatically from her partner's official report and aligned with what the video showed. Through it all, Marcus sat quietly, watching his mother work. She spoke rarely but with devastating effect, cutting through bureaucratic evasions and forcing accountability. This was a side of her he'd never witnessed, commanding, brilliant, ruthless in defense of what was right. Finally, Chief Reynolds raised his hands in surrender. Officer Mitchell will be placed on unpaid administrative leave effective immediately, pending an internal investigation and review by the State Attorney General's office. The citation issued to Marcus Williams is dismissed. His bicycle will be returned today with a full department apology, and I will personally ensure that bias training becomes mandatory for every officer under my command. Not good enough, Patricia said quietly. The room went silent. I also want Officer Mitchell's full employment record, including any previous complaints or incidents. I want a public statement from this department acknowledging systemic issues with racial profiling. And I want quarterly reports on stop-and-search data, broken down by race, for the next 2 years, submitted to an independent oversight committee. Ms. Williams, you're asking for? I'm asking for accountability, Chief Reynolds. I'm asking for the kind of transparency that prevents another black child from going through what my son experienced. And I'm asking for it because I can, because I have the resources and connections to demand it, but also because every child in this community deserves the same protection Marcus is getting today. Attorney General Martinez nodded approvingly. I think those are reasonable requests, Chief. In fact, I'll be mandating similar requirements statewide. Reynolds looked at Marcus, perhaps really seeing him for the first time. Son, I apologize for what you went through. It was wrong, and it should never have happened. The apology was stiff, clearly coerced, but it was something. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. I want to see Officer Mitchell, Patricia said suddenly. I want to confront him directly. Ma'am, that's highly irregular. Now, Chief, or we walk out of here and Ms. Franklin files every lawsuit we've prepared. 5 minutes later, Officer Derek Mitchell was escorted into the conference room. He looked different without his sunglasses and the authority of his uniform. Smaller somehow, more human. His eyes widened when he saw the assembled group, the chief, the attorney general, lawyers, Marcus's mother in her power suit. Officer Mitchell, Chief Reynolds said grimly, you've been placed on administrative leave. These people are here regarding yesterday's incident with Marcus Williams. Mitchell's gaze landed on Marcus, flickered with something that might have been recognition or regret, then slid away. I was doing my job, following protocol for suspicious activity. Suspicious activity, Patricia repeated, her voice dangerously calm. My son was riding his bike home from the community center, 3 blocks from his house, in the neighborhood where he's lived for 8 years. What exactly was suspicious about that, Officer Mitchell? The bike looked stolen. The location was high-value residential. There have been reports of. Reports of what? Black teenagers existing? Because that's what you're describing. My son presented his ID proving his address. You ignored it. He explained his ownership of the bicycle. You dismissed it. He showed you his belongings. You questioned every single thing he said, not because you had evidence of a crime, but because you had already decided he was guilty of something. Mitchell's face reddened. Ma'am, if your son had just been more cooperative. He was cooperative. Patricia's voice cracked like a whip. He answered your questions. He showed you his ID. He opened his backpack. He stood there and endured your humiliation in front of his neighbors. What more could he have done? I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know when something doesn't add up. Do you? Attorney General Martinez interjected coldly. Because from where I'm standing, the only thing that didn't add up was your judgment. You saw a black teenager and assumed criminality. That's not police work, Officer Mitchell. That's prejudice wearing a badge. I don't have to listen to this. Mitchell started to stand. Sit down. Chief Reynolds' voice was ice. You're not going anywhere until we're done here. Mitchell sat, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with resentment. Patricia leaned forward. Officer Mitchell, do you know who I am? Patricia Williams, the boy's mother. I'm also the senior policy advisor to the governor. I've spent my entire career working on civil rights issues, police reform, and community relations. I've sat in rooms with senators, with federal judges, with the heads of major police departments across this country. I've crafted policy that affects how officers like you do your job. Mitchell's face went pale. But yesterday, none of that mattered. Because yesterday, I was just a black mother whose son was targeted by someone who saw his skin color before seeing his humanity. You didn't know anything about me, about Marcus, about our family. You made assumptions based on prejudice, and you wielded your power to humiliate and intimidate a child. She pulled out her phone, queued up the viral video, and set it on the table facing Mitchell. "Watch," she commanded. The video played. Mitchell's voice echoed through the conference room. "That piece of junk shouldn't even be on this street." The escalation, the accusations, the casual cruelty of every question, every implication. "This has been viewed 4 million times," Patricia said as the video ended. 4 million people have watched you abuse your authority, 4 million witnesses to your prejudice. And every single one of them is asking the same question: how many other Marcus Williams are out there? How many other kids have you stopped, searched, and humiliated? How many incidents just like this one happened when there was no video, no crowd, no witnesses? Mitchell said nothing, but his hands were shaking. "Officer Chen," Patricia said, turning to the female officer who'd been Mitchell's partner, "tell us, is this the first time you've witnessed Officer Mitchell engaging in this kind of behavior?" Chen hesitated, glanced at the chief, then at the Attorney General. Her internal calculation was visible: career survival versus truth-telling. "No," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There have been other incidents, not exactly like this, but similar. Stops that seemed based more on profiling than probable cause. I've tried to moderate his approach, but—" "But you said nothing officially," Denise Franklin said. "You filed no complaints, no concerns with your supervisors." I should have. I know that now. I was wrong." The admission hung in the air, another layer of systemic failure exposed. Patricia stood, walked around the table, and stopped directly in front of Mitchell. Marcus watched, mesmerized by his mother's controlled fury. "You took my son's bike. You issued him citations. You accused him of crimes he didn't commit. You made him feel unsafe in his own neighborhood. You traumatized a 16-year-old boy whose only mistake was being black while riding a bicycle." She leaned down, her voice dropping to something almost intimate in its intensity. "But your biggest mistake, Officer Mitchell, was this. You forgot that every person you encounter has a story, a family, a value that exists independent of your judgment. You forgot that the badge you wear is supposed to protect, not persecute. You forgot that power without accountability is just tyranny in uniform." Mitchell's eyes were glassy. Whether from rage or shame, Marcus couldn't tell. "I could destroy your career," Patricia continued. "I could make you the face of everything wrong with modern policing. I could ensure you never wear a badge again anywhere in this country. I have that power, Officer Mitchell. I have those connections. One phone call, and your life becomes as difficult as you tried to make my son's yesterday." She straightened, stepped back. "But I won't. Do you know why?" Mitchell shook his head slightly. "Because I don't believe in ruining lives. I believe in accountability, consequences, and the possibility of change. So here's what's going to happen. You're going on unpaid leave. You're going to undergo extensive bias training. You're going to spend time in community organizations learning about the people you're supposed to serve. And if you complete that process with genuine understanding, you might get another chance. Not in Riverside, somewhere else where you can start fresh with lessons learned." She turned to Chief Reynolds. "That's my recommendation. The Attorney General can decide whether criminal charges for civil rights violations are warranted. Ms. Franklin can decide whether we file civil suits. But from me personally, that's all I'm asking." The mercy in her response was somehow more devastating than any punishment. Marcus saw Mitchell's facade crack, saw something like comprehension dawn in his eyes. Mitchell's voice was hoarse. "I didn't see it. In the moment, I didn't see what I was doing. I saw what I'd been trained to see, what I'd been conditioned to see." "Then learn to see differently," Patricia said simply. That's your only path forward. The meeting ended shortly after. Marcus's bike was wheeled out from the evidence room, looking exactly as it had yesterday, scratched, dented, beloved. He ran his hand over the familiar handlebars, felt the worn tape, and something in his chest loosened slightly. Outside the police station, the news crews had multiplied. Microphones and cameras converged as they exited. Patricia held up a hand and the crowd quieted. My name is Patricia Williams. Yesterday, my son Marcus was wrongfully detained, searched, and had his property seized while riding his bike in his own neighborhood. Today, the Riverside Police Department has apologized, dismissed the false citations, and committed to reforms that will protect other children from similar treatment. She put her arm around Marcus's shoulders. But let's be clear, we are only standing here because we had resources, connections, and the ability to fight back. Thousands of families don't have those advantages. Thousands of black and brown children face discrimination, harassment, and worse without cameras, without viral videos, without access to power. Her voice strengthened. So this isn't over. My son got his bike back, but we won't rest until every child in this state can ride their bike, walk their streets, and live their lives without fear of being presumed guilty for existing. That's the real work ahead, and that's the work we're committed to doing. Questions erupted from the reporters, but Patricia simply waved, guided Marcus to their car, and drove away. In the backseat, Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, I didn't know about your job, about what you could do about any of it. I know, baby, and I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I need you to understand something. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror. What happened today, the meetings, the apologies, the reforms, that's not normal. That's not what happens to most kids in your situation. We got justice because we could demand it, because we had power to wield. But justice shouldn't require power. It should be the default, the standard, the guarantee. What happens now? Now we go home, you get your bike back. You go back to school, to basketball, to being 16. But you also carry this experience forward. You remember what it felt like to be profiled, to be presumed guilty, to have your humanity questioned. And you use that memory to ensure the next generation doesn't have to go through the same thing. They drove through Riverside Hills as the sun began to set, the familiar streets taking on a different quality now. Marcus looked out at the houses, the perfectly maintained lawns, the children playing in yards. Everything looked peaceful, normal, safe. But he knew now that safety was conditional, that peace was fragile, that belonging could be questioned by anyone with a badge and a bias. They pulled into their driveway. Neighbors were waiting, Sarah Martinez with her promised empanadas, Tyler and his parents, Coach Ellis, Mrs. Henderson, and at least a dozen others. They'd organized a small gathering, a show of community support. We wanted you to know, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face, that this is your home, this is your neighborhood, and we will never let anyone make you feel otherwise again. The evening turned into an impromptu block party. Food appeared from various houses. Someone set up a speaker and music filled the air. Children played in the street, including Marcus, who finally retrieved his bike from the car and rode it in slow circles, feeling the familiar weight, the responsive steering, the freedom of movement. Tyler rode alongside him on his own bike. You're like famous now, bro. 4 million views. I don't want to be famous, Marcus said quietly. I just want to ride my bike. I know, but maybe something good comes from it. Like my dad said, the governor is pushing through reforms because of what happened. Maybe that helps other kids. Marcus considered this. The video of his humiliation had sparked something larger than himself. Conversations about policing, about bias, about the everyday racism that he'd experienced but many others had never witnessed. If his worst moment could lead to meaningful change, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. As darkness fell and the party wound down, Marcus found himself sitting on the front steps with his mother. She'd changed out of her power suit into jeans and a comfortable sweater. She looked more like his mom again, less like the political force he'd witnessed today. I'm proud of you, she said softly, for how you handled yesterday, for how you're handling today, for being you. I was scared, Marcus admitted. I'm still scared. What if it happens again? What if next time there's no video, no crowd, no happy ending? Then we fight again. But Marcus, you can't live in fear. That's what they want, for you to shrink, to doubt yourself, to question your right to exist freely. Don't give them that power. Is that what you do? When you face discrimination, prejudice, you just fight. Patricia laughed softly. Not always. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I want to give up, to stop having to prove my worth, my intelligence, my right to be in rooms where decisions are made. But then I think about you, about the world you're growing up in, about the world I want to leave you, and I find the strength to fight one more day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last neighbors drift home, listening to the night sounds of Riverside Hills, crickets chirping, distant traffic, the rustle of wind through leaves. Marcus's phone buzzed. Messages kept coming from classmates, from friends, from strangers who'd seen the video. Most were supportive, some were cruel. He'd learned today that visibility was a double-edged sword. You know what the weirdest part is? Marcus said. In all of this, the stops, the accusations, the humiliation, I never thought to say who you were. Like I could have told Officer Mitchell that my mom worked for the governor. That probably would have changed everything. Would it have been right to use my position to avoid discrimination? Marcus thought about that. No, because that means justice only comes if you have connections. That's not real justice. Exactly, you understood that instinctively yesterday. You tried to defend yourself based on truth, on your rights, on the fundamental principle that you'd done nothing wrong. That's the person I raised. That's the person you are. Patricia stood stretched. Come on, tomorrow's a school day, believe it or not. Life continues even after the extraordinary. Marcus followed her inside, casting one last look at his bike locked safely in the garage. Tomorrow he'd ride it to school. He'd navigate those familiar streets with new awareness, new caution, but also new determination. Because Officer Mitchell had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong, like his presence needed justification, like his very existence was suspicious. But standing here in his home, in his neighborhood, surrounded by evidence of community and love and support, Marcus knew the truth. He belonged, always had, always would. And no badge, no bias, no prejudice could take that away. The next morning, Marcus rode his bike to school. Word had spread overnight. Everyone knew about the incident, the video, the resolution. Some classmates gave him sympathetic looks. Others wanted details, wanted to hear his perspective, wanted to align themselves with his story. At lunch, the principal called him to the office. Marcus's heart raced, old fear spiking despite the previous day's victory. But Principal Andrews simply wanted to check on him, to ensure he had support, to offer counseling resources if needed. What happened to you was wrong, Andrews said, a black man in his late 40s who'd been principal for 3 years. But I'm proud of how you handled yourself. You're going to be fine, Marcus, more than fine. Basketball practice that afternoon was different, too. Coach Ellis pulled him aside before drills began. Your mother called me yesterday, the coach said. Told me what happened before I saw the video. I want you to know something, son. What you experienced, that fear, that humiliation, that sense of being judged for your skin color, I've lived that. Most black men in this country have lived that. Some version of it, anyway. How do you deal with it? Marcus asked. By being excellent, by refusing to let their prejudice define my reality, by building communities where we support each other, where we recognize each other's worth even when the world doesn't. Coach Ellis put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You're going to carry yesterday with you. That's unavoidable, but don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you better. Let it fuel your determination to change the system that created that moment. Practice was intense, physical cleansing. Marcus lost himself in the rhythm of dribbling, shooting, defending. On the court, none of yesterday mattered. Only skill, effort, teamwork. But walking home afterward, riding his bike through the cooling evening air, he felt the weight of awareness. Every car that slowed seemed potentially suspicious. Every person who looked at him seemed to be making judgments. The innocent act of riding a bike had been transformed into something fraught with meaning, with danger, with the potential for another confrontation. He hated that Officer Mitchell had taken this from him. The simplicity of movement, the joy of freedom, the uncomplicated pleasure of riding through his neighborhood. But he kept riding, because to stop would be to let fear win. 3 weeks later, the citation court date arrived. Marcus, his mother, and Denise Franklin appeared before Judge Catherine Morgan, a stern black woman with decades of experience on the bench. The courtroom was packed, media, community members, activists. The case had become symbolic of larger issues: racial profiling, police accountability, the criminalization of black youth. The prosecutor, clearly uncomfortable, stood to speak. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Marcus Williams. The citations were issued in error, and we apologize for any inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Judge Morgan's voice cut through the courtroom like steel. "Counselor, a 16-year-old boy was detained, searched, and had his property seized without probable cause. His character was impugned, his dignity violated, his safety threatened. That's not an inconvenience, that's a civil rights violation." The prosecutor stammered an apology. Judge Morgan turned to Marcus. "Young man, approach the bench." Marcus stood on shaky legs and walked forward. "Marcus Williams," the judge said, her stern expression softening slightly, "I want you to know that what happened to you should never have occurred. Officer Mitchell violated your rights, abused his authority, and perpetuated a pattern of discriminatory policing that has no place in a just society." She held up the citation paperwork. "These charges are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never be refiled. Your record will show that you were wrongfully detained, and I will be submitting a formal complaint about this incident to the State Judicial Oversight Committee." "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus managed. "Don't thank me. Thank your mother for raising you to be composed and respectful even in the face of injustice. Thank your community for supporting you. Thank yourself for having the courage to stand up for what's right." She leaned forward slightly. "And Marcus, never let anyone make you question your worth. You belong wherever you choose to be. Remember that." The gavel fell, case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. This time, Marcus stepped forward on his own, his mother standing supportively beside him. "I just want to say," Marcus spoke into the microphones, his voice steady, "that what happened to me happens to a lot of kids. Black kids, Latino kids, kids who look different or dress different or ride bikes that aren't brand new. We're not criminals. We're not suspicious. We're just kids trying to live our lives." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm lucky, my mom has connections, we had video evidence, we had community support. But what about the kids who don't have those things? They deserve justice too. They deserve to ride their bikes, walk their streets, exist in their own neighborhoods without fear. That's what needs to change, not just for me, but for everyone." The crowd erupted in applause. Patricia squeezed his shoulder, tears in her eyes. That evening, as the sun set over Riverside Hills, Marcus rode his bike one more time. Past Sarah Martinez's house, past Tyler's, past the spot where Officer Mitchell had stopped him weeks ago. The street looked the same, but everything felt different. He was different, no longer just a 16-year-old kid with dreams of becoming an architect. Now he was someone who'd stared down injustice and won, someone who'd learned that dignity couldn't be taken away, only temporarily obscured. He was Marcus Williams, son, student, athlete, friend, resident of Riverside Hills, owner of a scratched-up mountain bike, survivor of racial profiling, advocate for justice. And as he rode through the gathering darkness, the streetlights flickering to life one by one, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, not the carefree innocence of before, but something more valuable, the hard-won knowledge that he had the right to exist freely, fully, without apology. Officer Mitchell had tried to teach him that he didn't belong. Instead, Marcus had learned that he belonged everywhere, that his worth wasn't subject to anyone else's approval, that his blackness was not a crime but a heritage, a strength, a fundamental part of who he was. The bike's chain hummed its familiar rhythm. The wind carried the smell of blooming gardens and evening meals. Somewhere a dog barked. Children laughed in a nearby yard. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And Marcus Williams rode on, claiming his space, owning his story, living his truth. Where are you from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you're loving this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more.